Call the meeting to order. Is it the pleasure of the committee to take into consideration Bill number 25, an act respecting residential tenancies? Tenancies. Close enough. All those in favor, yeah. Please say yay. We should do a do-over. Okay. Do we have any substitutions? Thank you. Now is it the pleasure of the committee to take into consideration Bill number 25, an act respecting residential tenancies. All those in favor, please say yay. Yay. Against, nay? Carried. Minister, any opening remarks or brief comments? Introduce your staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We introduced amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act on November 24th to provide more protection for tenants. The amendments include enabling residential tenancies officers to rule that an increase in rent will take place over a period of 3 years instead of immediately, and increase the time frame from 30 days to 60 days for seeking assistance from a residential tenancies officer when a notice of rent increase has been received. The following staff are here with me: Alan Roy, Chief Executive Officer of Service New Brunswick; Judy Ross, who is the Vice President of Public Services at Service New Brunswick; and Paul Steeves is here for his first time in the legislature, and he's the Deputy Chief of the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. And I am very pleased to open the floor to any questions the members opposite might have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Member from Kent South.
Well, I hadn't even stood up. How did you know I would ask some questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It is indeed a pleasure to rise and to ask questions to the Minister regarding this bill. I do want to salute her staff, which I've had the pleasure of working with many of them in a previous capacity. It was a pleasure, and the Minister is privileged to be working with such competent people. So I guess my first question to the Minister regarding Bill 25, I would ask the Minister to give a general overview of the bill. This is not a, how can I say, this is not a 200-page bill. It's not, we've seen much more complex bills before. So I'm just, and I know that the Minister has talked about it in second reading, but I'm just asking her to, let's start kind of an introduction of the question period here to say, what are the main issues regarding this bill? I believe there's a couple, so I'm asking the Minister to give us a general overview of Bill 25. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to the member opposite. We all know that we are experiencing significant population growth here in New Brunswick, and that has helped add to the strong demand for both the ownership and rental markets. The limited inventory for sale has persisted in the ownership market, and combined with rapidly increasing prices, may limit the transition of renters into home ownership. There has been supply pressure, and a record pace of apartment construction is continuing. However, the extended development period will not result in immediate relief in the rental market. Moreover, the majority of the properties currently under construction are higher-end units targeting upper-income households. Record apartment property sales and prices are placing upward pressure on rents, while the industry is facing a number of cost pressures, including significant property tax increases to rapidly rising assessment values. Construction costs have increased significantly over the last year, and this has likely put additional upwards pressure on rents as new units come on the market, improvements are made to existing buildings. And therefore, we are proposing additional measures to protect tenants in the rental housing market. And there are two amendments being proposed to the Residential Tenancies Act. The first one is allowing residential tenancies officers to rule that an increase in rent will take place over a period of 3 years instead of immediately. And the second being that we are increasing the time frame from 30 days to 60 days where tenants can seek assistance from a residential tenancies officer when notified of a notification of a rent increase has been received. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, through the chair, to the minister for that answer. And yes, it gives a general idea of what the bill consists. It's relatively simple. And I have to also, I want to thank the department, Service New Brunswick, because they did offer also a technical briefing, which I did attend, and it was a very useful session. I did learn a lot about it. I was able to ask lots of questions. I will most probably ask the same questions. I will most probably get the same answers. I'm doing this in the interest of the public, so we can, the public can better understand what's going on here. Hopefully even media can catch this, because there's some relevant information, I think, that needs to be put out there. And the more people know, the more useful the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal will be, because there's, I'll probably talk about the rent cap sometime in the next couple of hours, but it seems that the minister is not going to go that route. So, and if that's being the case, then we want to do what I would consider the next best thing, and the next best thing was to make sure that people know about the RTT, which is the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal. My first question, the next question, would be the 30 to 60 days that the amendment that is proposed. Can the minister explain when that time period is specifically? So is it 30 days after the notice that they've received? We know now that the owners can only suggest a rental increase once a year. We know that they need to give a 6 months notice now, but they can contest with the tribunal, and it goes from 30 days to 60 days. So they have an extra month, more or less, to contest. Is this the minute they received the notice of increase, or is it after the increase starts? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, I'm going to go to what you were first talking about, when you were talking about making sure that tenants are aware of, number one, what their rights are under the Residential Tenancies Act, and that there are residential tenancies officers there to help them if they receive a rate increase that they feel is unfair. And so we've ramped up an awareness campaign about the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. We've increased our social media presence. We have promotional videos that we play on digital screens throughout the province, public-facing provincial offices like Service New Brunswick Centre. We've also revamped our www.snb.ca/iRent website by creating more intuitive navigation, streamlining our messaging on there, and ensuring it's at a good reading level. We also have newspaper and radio ads running, and we are sending promotional items by mail to more than 300 support service providers, such as nonprofit organizations, municipal offices, MLA offices, to ensure that tenants do know that there is a body there to help them when they have concerns. The second piece, your actual question you had, was around when the 60 days would begin. And it begins on the date that the tenant receives a notice of rent increase.
Well, thank you for that. So the minute they get their notice of increase, they have 60 days to bring it forward to the RTT if they want to contest the increase. Very good. Okay, that's under normal circumstances. that makes sense. What is happening with the current circumstances, which are not normal, and what I mean by that is the fact that the bill hasn't passed yet, and it will likely pass because this government has the majority. When it does pass, and let's say if it gets enforced January 1st, what happens? And also, we have people that have received notices. Many have received notices in July for increases that are going to be in effect on January 1st. Now, since there is no rent cap, at least not at the moment, these are going to go ahead. So what happens to the people who have gotten these notices, do not think they're fair or just, and want to contest, want to bring it forward, but we're way past the 60 days right now because they got their notice in July or August. So can the minister comment on that and hopefully bring some flexibility to that? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, there is a transition period built in to the amendments where if a tenant received a rent increase after July 1st, they will have 60 days starting January 1st to come back to the RTT.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, any rent increase notice that has been given starting July 1st, so including July 1st through until, let's say, today, that is all built in, that they will have the first 60 days of 2023 to contest. I just want to make sure.
Opposite, you are correct. Anybody that's received a rent increase since July 1st, 2022 will have 60 days to come to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal starting January 1st.
Thank you very much. It's good to make that specific, to be specific, because I can tell you, and I'm sure the minister will agree that a lot of us get calls regarding this, and we will be getting lots of calls on this. As we all know, this has made headlines the last few days, and in a certain way, I know it's been tough on the minister, but I think it's been good for the RTT in the sense that there's much more awareness than there ever was regarding the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal and its role and its importance. And so the more that we know, I know it's actually, I have to admit, it's been very informative for me. It's not something, it's funny because my assistant is a retired social worker, so he knew everything. He knew everything about this, but until 6 weeks ago, I didn't even know there was a Residencies Tenancies Tribunal, and I was like, oh my God, I've been this ignorant for so long. I've been here way too long for me not to know this, and thankfully I have an assistant who says, no, I had it all under control. Don't worry, I've been dealing with them for a while. So thank God. You know what they say, if you're not smart, make sure we're surrounded by people who are. So at least for that, I'm covered. So coming back to the First Amendment, it's quite straightforward, it's clear. The minister has been clear with her answers. The second part, which is where the rent increase can be sort of spread out up to 3 years, as I understand it. Just like some clarification of that, what that can mean, what that will mean, in terms of, Before I go into specifics, I would ask if the minister could give me a general overview of what that amendment means in more concrete and practical terms. Thank you.
So, through the chair to the member opposite, I'm going to tell you what the methodology that we're implementing. So anything up to the consumer price index would be implemented in one annual increase. CPI will be set in December of the previous year, December 2022, for rent increases to occur in 2023, for example. Any increases above CPI would be distributed over 2 years if the amount is below half of CPI. So if let me see how to describe this. It sounds a little complicated, but anything below double CPI would be distributed over 2 years, and anything above double CPI would be over 3 years. So, you know, if the residential tenancies officers review the proposed rent increase, determine A, that it is fair, or they mediate it to a lower level, but it is, so just for discussion purposes, let's say CPI is 5%. If it was below 10%, the increase would happen over 2 years. Anything over 10% would happen over 3 years. So say it was 20%, it would be broken up over 3 years, evenly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's complicated.
Well, thank you to the minister through the chair. That's very relevant information. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit pedagogical here because I have a teaching background, and I just want to make sure that I understand, but I'm hoping it'll help some people watching, the hundreds of thousands of people watching this, you know, riveting show. I mean, it's because they love to see your face, Mr. Chair. You have that photogenic, camera-catching face. But in all seriousness, so what the minister says is anything, so the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, is sort of going to be like the bar to see. So am I to understand that that's sort of the, oh, in French we say l'étalon. How do we say that? My colleague here, has a financial background here. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I guess I don't speak his language. But you use it as a peg. Yeah, right. You use it as a peg. So the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, would be the peg in terms of if a benchmark. Thank you. See, I'm getting there. So the CPI would be the benchmark to be the, okay, anything below or up to that would go for a year. Anything over that until it is double would be spread out in 2 years. And anything more than that, it would be over 3 years. But then, as the minister explained it, and I just want to be clear here, if it is above that, even, you know, above, let's say, triple, it is evenly divided into 3 years. I see heads nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. So I'll take that as I understood, and I've been a good student, Mr. Chair. So very good. Well, that's, you know, it sounds complicated, but it's not that complicated. So even I can understand it. So that's good. It's important because we need to be able to explain this. Can the minister tell us what the benchmark, which is the Consumer Price Index, is she going to use the 2022 Consumer Price Index, the 2021, from which, is it calendar year, is it financial year? What's the, can the Minister give us some details on that?
Okay, through the chair to the member opposite. So before we even get to that, I just want to say again, and I'll keep saying it, that the first step in this process is the residential tenancies officer and the residential tenancies tribunal have to agree that the rent increase is reasonable. So they would first do their analysis to look at that particular unit in its particular building, in its particular neighborhood, and look at what the market rent is appropriate for that unit. So that's the first step. So if they approve a rent increase at that point, and these are the actual words from the bills, just I thought that might clarify things a little bit more. In this section, consumer price index means the consumer price index for New Brunswick, all items, most recently published by Statistics Canada under the, I can't say that word right now, Statistics Act Canada for the 12-month period ending December 31st. So the consumer price index we would be using would be this month in 2022 that we would apply for 2023.
Thank you to the chair to the minister. So if I understand correctly, basing ourselves on that, if this bill goes into effect on January 1st, which I believe it will, if that is the case, that would mean that pertaining to what the minister just read, it would be using the consumer price index of January 1st, 2022, if it comes into effect on January 1st, 2023. Did I understand properly?
Through the chair to the member opposite, no, you don't quite have it right. You should listen, it's not quite right. We will be using the consumer price index set at the end of December 2022 for the 2023 year.
So, thank you. I'm asking questions for clarification here. The issue I can see, well, okay. I'm not familiar with this. When the consumer price index, when Statistics Canada publishes the consumer price index report or publication or what it is, I can't see them publish it on January 1st regarding December 2022. Normally, wouldn't it take a few weeks or months for them to gather the data and then basically publish something? The point I'm making is, in January, which is coming, in less than a month from now, chances are that the department won't, or Service New Brunswick won't have access to the 2022 full statistics. So, what is the department or Service New Brunswick going to do? Are you going to use the 2021 statistics, or are you just going to wait, or how is that going to happen? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, we did consider that, and the statistics for December are released 2 weeks into January. So considering there's a 6-month notice for the rent increase from the landlord, there is a 60-day window to come to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal and ask for them to review the rent increase. And in the time that we would do the review of that particular unit in that particular market, we would have that information.
Well, thank you to the minister through the chair. That makes sense. Okay, yeah. So 2 weeks. That's fast. Impressive. Okay, good. So, so that means that the Service New Brunswick should have the right information at the right time to do their analysis. Okay, well, I'm just going piece by piece here. So when it comes to spreading out the rent increases from, you know, from a one-time thing, which it's pretty much always has been, to stretch it out over up to a 3-year period, either because we know now it's only once a year. Is it possible? Let me just ask this: with this new bill, is it possible to have it in twice in a year, like 6 months, like January 1st and July 1st, and then January, or is it just once a year? I just want to double confirm that.
The member opposite, it is not like once in a calendar year. It's once every 12 months can you have a rent increase. So if a landlord increased your rent on June 1st of a year, they can't increase it again until after June 1st the next year.
Well, thank you for that. I have another important question regarding the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that you will be using as a benchmark. Are you using the average annual CPI, or are you using the one that you received for December? Thank you. I think you understand the question.
Through the chair to the member opposite, it's the average for the year, the full year.
Average for the year. Okay, good enough. Would that have been? Would that explain the rent cap at 3.8%? Did you use the exact same numbers for 2021? For the? Oh, I see heads nodding, so I can move on if that's okay. All right, yep, heads are nodding, we understand each other, so I can move on. Okay, so basically it would be the exact same exercise, but instead of a rent cap, it would be using the RTT. Okay, well, that makes it clearer. All right, and again, I just want to repeat the minister's answers. For pedagogical, you know, sometimes you have to repeat, that there will only be a rent increase once every 12 months. So if there is an increase, it doesn't matter the month of the year, you cannot have a second increase before another 12 months has passed. Okay, I see heads nodding again. So, got it. That's cleared up. My question, and we can't give the final answer, but is there a month? And I'm not an economist, although I did study a bit of it with my master's a long time ago. But the CPI, would we know what it is looking like in 2022? I know there's a month missing, but would we know where we are at more or less right now?
Through the chair to the member opposite, it was 7.3% most recently. I know there's a month missing, so it's approximately.
Thank you, through the chair to the minister, and I understand that that's not the final number, but it is indicative of probably what's to come. It's going to be closer to 7.3 than it's going to be from 3.8. Let's say that. Okay, so, and I realize right now I'm just how can I say, I'm just speculating. So I recognize this, but it's going to probably hover around 7.5% would be my guess at the end. But we'll look at the final numbers. But that gives us at least an idea of what to expect. So I guess that kind of clears up my specific questions regarding the bill, because the bill is not that, like I said, it's not that complicated, although it was good to have these questions for clarification, and the minister answered them quite well, and we have a better idea of, you know, what, and it'll help me go back home in my constituency office. I'm already getting some, you know, Facebook messenger messages about that, and I can basically say, well, so this is very helpful. I do have some questions, however, regarding not necessarily what's in the bill, but what's not in the bill. And I think this is an appropriate time to have a healthy discussion. And the minister and I have had an opportunity to have a private discussion, a very constructive and healthy discussion as well. But I think it would be useful for everybody to better understand what's going on. And obviously, we have some philosophical differences, which is normal, and it's to be expected. Having said that, let me just start with, okay, the minister has basically told us, and this is important information, that the RTT, oh, and before I go there, the minister did say something important, and I want to stress it out because the way I might sound like if the tribunal will automatically give out the increase. The minister just said that there will be cases where that's not going to happen. I mean, if a place is asking a 5% increase, but they're already 20% over the market around, well, if I'm hoping that the RTT will not go ahead and give out, you know, allow that increase to happen. Can I just have a confirmation from the minister, just to make sure?
Through the chair to the member opposite, I'll give you actual data around this. So we both know the most important date related to this year was July 1st, because that was the 6-month notice for the January 1st rent increases. Since that date, we have received 112 requests for review. And our residential tenancies officers also mediate between tenants and landlords to help them come to an agreement together on what would be an appropriate rent increase. So of the 112, 27 clients withdrew their request. 30 was a mediated lower increase than the landlord had originally notified the tenant of. Only 8 of the 112 were the new rent increases found reasonable. Only 8. 17, the rent increase was denied. The landlord did not serve proper notice, and so therefore it was denied. 2, the rent increase was denied because the new rent was just too high and they couldn't mediate anything that was reasonable. 2 of them, the tenant applied after the 30-day notice period, but the good thing for those 2 is they're going to have 2 more months in January to have that reviewed. And then we have 26 that are still under investigation. So it's not automatic by any stretch of the imagination, Mr. Chair.
I took some notes, but I'm a poor note taker. would the minister be so kind as to repeat? I have 112 requests for review. I had 30 lower immediate increases, 8 were found reasonable, 17 were denied, 26 are still under investigation. That doesn't amount to 112. So that's where I'm in the wrong here. So I would ask the indulgence of the minister to.
I could. It has to be translated, though. It's just an email. So through the chair to the member opposite, I'll go slow and give me the thumbs up when you get it written down. Does that sound good? 27 were withdrawn by the client. 30 were mediated to a lower increase. 8 were found reasonable. 17 were denied because improper notice was served. 2 were denied because the new rent increase was not found to be reasonable. 2 tenants applied after their 30 days, and 26 are under investigation.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been trying to use my brain. It's a difficult exercise for me. But yeah, I was a language teacher, and it shows. So I'm not counting 100. It doesn't add to 112, but because I had 30, and well, there was 27, 30, 8, 17, 26, 2, and 2. That didn't amount to 112. Can you check if it did, if I may? Thank you.
I just used my tap, tap, tap little calculator, and it does equal 112. So you've got something wrong. Would you want me to go through them again for you?
I'll be honest. You know, the minister admitted a mistake yesterday. I'll admit one today. I used my head, and then I used the calculator, and the calculator was right. My head was wrong. That happens often. I apologize to the minister and to everybody listening. Where's the camera? Sorry. Okay, so we have 112. Le compte est bon. And I guess the first thing that kind of pops into my mind is the 27, which is about more or less a quarter, which were withdrawn. Can the minister explain why a quarter of the requests for review were withdrawn? Do you have any type of reasons given for that?
Chair, to the member opposite, there's a number of reasons why it may have been withdrawn. The client may have decided to move from that particular property. The landlord could have withdrawn the rent increase notice. Or the tenant and the landlord could reach an agreement between the two of them on what the two of them would consider a reasonable rent increase, and therefore it would be withdrawn. So there's a number of different reasons that they could have withdrawn their application.
Thank you. Well, this is very good information because it kind of gives a good landscape of at least where the tribunal is now in terms of I'm just kind of spitballing general numbers here. So out of the 112 this is for this year, for 2022. Okay, I see nodding. So for 2022 until now, so you have more since July 1st. Oh wow. Okay, thank you. Since July 1st. So less than 6 months, 112 requests for review. About a quarter has been withdrawn, more or less. More or less a quarter are still under investigation, which is normal, or because we're talking less than. I do know, and I'll say this, I would ask this, but I already know the answer. Well, no, why don't I ask the minister so the minister can have the pleasure of answering. What is the delay, the normal delay for when you put in a request? What is the normal delay for the RTT to give an answer or to give a decision? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, first I want to say that any tenant that applied to the residential tenancies officer would have a response, the first response to acknowledge that we'd received that within 48 hours. And then the average time it would take is around 30 days. It can be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on what mediation's required, that kind of thing, but 30 days is the standard.
Thank you, through the chair to the minister, and that's what I had been told in my technical briefing, but the minister has a much nicer voice than I have, so I think it's important to give her the platform, the soapbox, as they say. So, under the 26 that are under investigation, it could be explained by some are complex and they take more time than 30 days. Would it be frequent, I guess, because there's different possibilities here. Like the 26 that haven't been resolved, it's possible that some of them were only deposited 2-3 weeks ago. So that also obviously makes sense that we're not around the 30-day mark. But how frequent would it be that, or how many? And I'm not asking for a specific number, but can the minister give a general idea of how long these ones that can take, much more than 30 days? Can she give at least what there would be a maximum? It should be no more than 3 months, or it should be no more than 4 or 5 months, something like that. And how frequent or infrequent does that happen? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, 30 days really is the average. We've had, you know, a few more complicated cases take up to 47 days, so 50% more than what would be the norm. Still, you know, very early in that 6-month period.
Well, that's reassuring. So, okay. So your maximum until now has been 47 days, which is a month and a half, more or less. Okay, well, good. I'm just hoping that those statistics will keep constant in 2023. I say that because I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody here in this room by saying that there's probably going to be an increase in requests for reviews. I do believe that's going to happen. So if things keep as they are now, which I believe they are. Okay, my next question would be, now that we know that we're going to base ourselves on the CPI, the average CPI, we know that in 2022, it's been until now 7.3%. It's going to vary a little bit, but probably not by much. We'll know in about a month from now, 5 weeks from now. That will be the benchmark that the RTT will be using. If they deem that an increase is reasonable, they will conduct a market research to make sure that it is deemed reasonable, and we have here the statistics, and they've mediated some, you know, some lower increases, and some that have been found reasonable, some that were felt that were completely denied because they were felt as improper, which means at least it's working. We'll see. Now, obviously, right now there is actually, as we all know, currently there is a rent cap in place of 3.8% that has been enforced for 2022. That is not happening for 2023 as it stands. And with the amount of time we have, unless the minister goes into a frenzy this weekend, I'm not too optimistic is what I'll say. However, having said that, the minister knows that I have been public about saying that I do feel that the rent cap would be an appropriate measure for 2023, and I can state why. It's shown, you know, that in 2022, this current year, it did not stop constructions. There have been less. The minister and you know, the minister we've cleared up the air about the startup term and all of that. Yes, there have been less startups in 2022, but the number of construction has been very active, number one. But we also know that there is a huge labor shortage in New Brunswick, and there are inflationary costs when it comes to building materials. So, and economists have confirmed, or many have confirmed, more than one, I'll say this, and New Brunswick-based economists, not people from over yonder, and, you know, they are saying that in these current conditions, a rent cap did work well in 2022, and with the current conditions for 2023 would work just as well. And it works well for people that are already in their units, that are not going anywhere, people that are fixed incomes, and I've given this example more than once, and I apologize to the minister if I keep saying it, but you know, I repeat it because it's important. In Bouctouche, half of the people living in Bouctouche depend on a government-issued check, and these are fixed incomes, Mr. Chair. So, you know, either EI, either old age and supplement, or disabled pensions. So they have seen some very small increases, but nowhere near the increases that we're seeing in you know, the market, the housing market, should I say. So they don't have the revenues to offset these increases that they're seeing. So that is why I remain worried, and the rent cap gives them the best protection possible. So I will ask the minister, like I said, now I'm more into questions not about what's in the bill, but what is not in the bill. My question to the minister is, why did the minister decide not to go ahead with a rent cap and use a similar mechanism that she just described for the RTT? Why could that not have been put in a rent cap? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, this government is working on a balanced approach to dealing with our housing crisis. And we have made some changes that would be considered a benefit to the landlords around assessments and tax that they can be, that they would pay. But we've also, these proposed amendments are the third change to the Residential Tenancies Act to protect tenants. So in December last year, we introduced changes that limit the rent increases to once a year and prohibits rent increases within the first year of a tenancy. So a new tenant would not get a rent increase for at least the first year of them being in their unit. We also increased the authority of the Residential Tenancies Tribunal by allowing it to review all rent increases, not only those that apply to long-term tenancies. The tenancies are reviewed to ensure the new rent amount is comparable to market value for similar units in the geographic area. Also, we increased the notice period for a rent increase to 6 months from 3 to give tenants more time to adapt. At that time, we gave tenants the 30 days to apply to have a rent increase reviewed by the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, because it was only at 15 days before December of last year. And we also eliminated some unnecessary administrative steps for landlords to remove barriers to service. We weren't done there. We came back in January. We did the temporary rent cap at 3.8%. And we also limited landlords' rights to terminate tenancies to only 4 reasons are they allowed to evict a tenant. The 4 reasons are that a family member is going to move into the unit, extensive renovations are required, are being conducted that would require the unit to be vacant. So that's the second one. The third reason is that they are taking the space and converting it to a non-residential premise. And the final reason is the tenant was the superintendent that was employed by that facility, and that employment agreement has ended. In January, we also changed it so that tenants can apply for compensation if their tenancy has been terminated unlawfully, and also put fines in place for landlords if they were found to terminate a tenancy in bad faith. And then now we are proposing extending the 30 days to 60 days for tenants to apply to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to review their rent increases. What's the other one? Oh, right. Thank you. That was a big speech, so I forgot the last piece I wanted to say. And the last piece is giving the authority for the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to allocate an approved rent increase over a period of time up to 3 years to provide additional protections for tenants. So there has been a lot of changes made to protect tenants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I want to thank the Minister for that answer through the Chair. And I won't deny that lots has been done in the past, let's say, year and a half. And I'm going to go on a little, not a rant, but maybe a soliloquy. Because the thing is here is there's a reason why I didn't know much about the Tenancies Tribunal. It's because until a year ago, we were not seeing the increases we're seeing now, at least not in my part of the world. You know, and I think we all know that in New Brunswick, let's be honest, until the pandemic, we had, you know, we didn't have a growth in population that we're having now. We did not have the inflation that we're having now. We did not have a lot of upward pressures to see sharp increases in renting property or renting apartment, you know, a place to live. So the rental market was relatively stable for many, many years, and I would actually argue many decades. So for that reason, yes, the tribunal has been there for a while, but very few people knew about it because very few people needed to know about it. They didn't have to because it wasn't, very few people needed it basically because I mean, there's always something happening, and it's a good thing it's there because some people actually do need it. But the issue is that we are facing unprecedented times here in New Brunswick now. We are facing, like I said, you know, galloping inflation, labor shortage, population increase. The minister is very well aware. She's mentioned it many times. And yes, in response, the minister listed everything that they have done, and they have. I'm certainly not going to deny. And is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely, it is a step in the right direction. The point I would make, however, is it enough? I'm just thinking of, and I do want to talk about, and this is why I'm a proponent of the rent cap, and not so much a tribunal. You know, like I said, and I was quoted, I think, in the media. You know, if the rent cap is not there, then we need to rely on the tribunal. So we want to make sure that the tribunal is as strong as possible, you know, and it can enforce the best way possible. And I'm certainly willing to collaborate with that. But I'm not going to stop saying that a rent cap in these current conditions would be a better option. And I will keep harping on that. But what I do want to say is that a tribunal is a way that a lot of people get intimidated by that. And I'm not talking, see, the issue is we have some people in New Brunswick and in every society, some are more educated than others. It's the way the world works. And the people that are more educated are a bit more aware of these things and are less intimidated by, you know, these types of things. Now, I do know that the people that do have that level of education or that level of awareness, they're the ones that need less a tribunal often. And when they do, they will go right at it. I'm not saying this is an automatic, but I am saying that there is a correlation between the level of education, level of wealth as well. So if you're more educated and wealthier, you will need less the RTT. And if you do need it, you will be very confident and you will have no hesitation on how and to use it and to find out the way to use it and pull out the stops to make sure that you use it properly. There is also, unfortunately, a correlation that if you are less educated, you have less means, the idea of a tribunal is intimidating, you don't know where to go, and sometimes you will stay home and you will just take it because you just don't know what to do and you're afraid. Some people are just afraid, you know, to go further. So I was listening to the minister talking about an awareness campaign, which is good. I'm not saying it's not good. What I am saying is, will it reach the population that it should be reaching? And we can do the best work that we can as MLAs and elected officials, and there are some non-for-profit organizations, and there certainly can be outreach done, and we can have a certain penetration, but I still feel that it still won't be enough. And going with the RTT is a way where we're going to leave some people behind. That's where I'm coming. That is the logic I'm following here by using the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal. I'm not, and it's not to bash the instrument per se, because it is, I think, a good instrument. It's necessary. I think it's been effective. It's just about, and we've had this discussion, the minister and I. It's about putting the onus on the tenants right now. The rent cap would have taken that out, and that is why I am a proponent of the rent cap, because then the tenant, the ones that need protecting. Now, the minister might say, yeah, but you know, there are some that don't need protecting that are protected. It's a fair argument, but I'm thinking of, let's call it the little guy, you know, and the people that need that don't have the means, that don't have the confidence, that, I mean, I've had issues with some of my constituents, good, salt of the earth, solid people, that I've had to sit with them on a conference call with a tribunal of sorts, such like that, in their mother tongue of French, because they didn't fully understand, they didn't, you know, and they were Acadian like I was, but they were just, and I was there and I basically explained to them what the person was saying, and you know, that's the reality of my riding, and I think it's the reality of many in New Brunswick. And when you tell them, oh, well, you know, make a complaint at the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal, just that term is intimidating per se. So that is why, and I do want to, sorry I made a long soliloquy here, but it is, I want the minister and people to understand where I'm coming from with this, and why my insistence of the minister considering a rent cap rather than going this approach here. Not that this can't be effective, it's just because of the makeup of the population and the ones that need it the most, this will not penetrate as much as a rent cap would. So that is my argumentation. I would like the minister to react to that and, you know, continue the healthy debate. Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite. Yeah, that was a pretty long soliloquy. But I do thank you for sharing that, because that is part of the healthy debate you and I had when we sat down together earlier this week. And you've explained to me clearly why you think a rent cap should remain in place. And I certainly listened to everything you had to say. As I explained when we were chatting, all the issues related to the housing spectrum and the crisis we're in because we have such a low vacancy rate is broad and deep and complicated. A rent cap is and I'll use the term, I believe somebody used a blunt instrument. So it's for the entire housing spectrum. It would be applied to every unit in the province. And as you said in your soliloquy, a number of tenants can absorb things more than other tenants. We care about the people that are vulnerable and are concerned that they are going to experience stress and anguish if they get a large rent increase notice. And that's why we have introduced so many changes to the Residential Tenancies Act to try to protect them. I've also said, and I think I don't know if it was when I was answering questions yesterday in this House or when I was talking to the reporters or maybe in our conversations together as well, that we are continuing a dialogue with the stakeholders in the housing spectrum and did a huge number of meetings late last summer with each of the stakeholder groups to solicit feedback on changes they would like to see in the Residential Tenancies Act that would help with their stakeholders that they're representing. And so they were stakeholders from the tenant side and the landlord side. And that's the challenge, is to have a balanced approach. And we believe the changes that we have made are providing that balanced approach. I would also like to say that the Residential Tenancies Tribunal could seem a little daunting for some tenants in New Brunswick. And so not only are we doing more awareness, which you are correct, this dialogue back and forth and what has been going on in the press does bring the Residential Tenancies Tribunal more front and center so that people are aware that it exists and they are an avenue they could use to assist them if they believe they've received a rent increase that's unfair, or if they receive a notice of eviction that they think is inappropriate. Now, but we also do outreach beyond that. And I'm going to read to you some of the groups that we do active outreach with. We do presentations at housing fairs. So, for example, at St. Thomas University, they had a housing fair. We were there to answer questions and for them to get to know us. We've exhibited at Together We Care in St. John. We've met with safer communities and neighborhoods. We've met with senior advocacy groups, the Ombuds staff, done presentations at UNB St. John. We participated in an information exhibition at the Dorchester Penitentiary. Met with the Fire Marshal's Office, the United Way, NB Tenants Coalition, Human Rights Commission of New Brunswick. Welcome You, an organization that assists newcomers, so we've met with them and provided them information. I've also, interestingly, a couple of weeks ago was Student Advocacy Week here in New Brunswick, and I had the opportunity to meet with two organizations that represented the students, the university students here in New Brunswick, and they got to share their concerns about tenants' rights and how it relates to students. One of the things they asked for was more information be provided to them about what the tenants' rights were here in New Brunswick. And beyond that, they even offered to help us develop material that would be appropriate for the students, which was a fantastic offer, and we are going to be taking them up on it. Because there are oftentimes, or many students come to New Brunswick from other places. So knowing what their rights are as tenants is extremely important for them so that they cannot get taken advantage of. So we believe this is a balanced approach. We knew the rent cap was necessary for 1 year. When we put it in place, we were very clear it was a temporary rent cap and that it would expire at the end of December 2024. There has been a lot of changes in that period of time to the Residential Tenancies Act and to property assessments and tax associated with that for the landlords. These two things provide a balanced approach. We are also, the stakeholders provided us with their recommendations for changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, and we are currently considering all those changes and expect to bring more forward in this session this spring in the legislature, more changes. So, through the chair to the member opposite, we feel that we've provided a balanced approach. We've put additional protections in place for tenants, while at the same time striving to increase the building of units, multi-unit rentals, residential rentals here in New Brunswick. The biggest thing we need to do is get that vacancy rate higher. And I can tell you I'm eagerly awaiting the numbers for this year to see whether we've moved from the 1.7% vacancy rate for 2021. And I'll be very eager to see if it's where it's at the end of this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Honourable Minister, it's Mr. Speaker one day. Perhaps. Through the chairs to the Minister, thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. I will not deny that what this Minister and this government has been doing is providing a more balanced approach. I think where we have a philosophical difference, and I'll say this, what the Minister considers balance and what I consider balance are a bit in a different place. Maybe not that different, but different enough for me to say it. And I would argue that it's not quite balanced enough, and I've said this at second reading, where I find it's still a bit, it's a bit more owner-friendly than tenant-friendly right now. It's leaning a bit more on the tenant side than, I'm sorry, the owner side than on the tenant side. And I've said this also, that, and in questions this week to the Minister, that there is there's a balance of power, right? That a natural balance of power between the owners and the tenants. And normally the tenants have the bigger end of the stick, naturally. It's not to say, again, it's a correlation. It's not 100% and zero, it's not that at all. But there is a correlation where the owners have an advantage over that struggle because they have more means, simply put. Of course, some tenants have the means and all of that, but in more simple terms, that is the case. So with that in mind, that is why I am saying that, and that's why I'm a proponent of the rent cap, because the rent cap basically puts a bit more power to the tenant by doing that, and it offsets that. It makes it a bit more balanced in my mind, without hurting the development of construction, because we're seeing that that's not the main issue when it comes to problems with the new constructions, at least not now, from what we're seeing. Again, I don't want to say, I've dealt with people who would like to see you know, a permanent rent cap. Some are arguing that even a permanent rent cap can create you know, new developments, and it's still very reasonable to do that. That's right now. Personally, the jury's still out when it comes to myself. I'm not talking, you know, but I would certainly say that for a temporary rent cap, then I think there's a case to be made, and I certainly have been making it, and I will keep doing so, at least for 2023. Okay, enough of that. I guess I want to, and I do want to encourage the minister, you know, because I know, and I'll say this, I was waiting for the end, but I'll say it now, I guess, because I have to throw flowers once in a while to the minister. And the minister, I mean, we know, I know that this minister wants to do what's best for New Brunswickers, and I know that, and I appreciate that, and I do have a lot of respect for this minister. I've been tough on her this past week. Sometimes I have to do my job and ask tough questions, but I do want to say that she wants to do what's right, and I feel that. But it doesn't mean we can't disagree philosophically, and we do somewhat. But we both agree that we want what's best for New Brunswickers. So, you know, I do want to put that out there for starters. I do want to ask another more practical question that I have forgotten, but this is, and I think this is important, because when I was talking about the tenants, you know, a lot of the tenants not knowing what to do, being intimidated. My question, and this is, I think it's very important public information. I did receive this information from my technical briefing, but I think the minister has an opportunity to give that public information. It's important. What do people do if they want to make a request for a review of their rent? Where do they go? What do they do? Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, there are a number of different ways a tenant can ask the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to assist them if they believe they've received a rent increase that is unreasonable and unfair. They can go to any Service New Brunswick Service Centre and ask for assistance there. I gave the website earlier, or our iRent website. That's on the www.snb.ca/iRent. They can put their information in online there and ask for assistance. They can email the Residential Tenancies Tribunal requesting assistance. There's a 1-800 number on our iRent website that they can use to call the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. It's important to note that, because you were talking that some tenants are maybe a bit intimidated. A tribunal kind of sounds maybe a little scary, even though it's not. There's wonderful, wonderful people that work there. But they can have any friend or family go ask for assistance for them as well. And as likely the member opposite knows that they can also come into your local MLA's constituency office, and the team that are there can assist them in requesting that their rent increase be reviewed. And they can actually go into any elected representative that could help them navigate how to put their information, give the information that's required to the residential tenancies officer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker someday.
Thank you very much to the minister through the chair. So I'm just going to re-say this because I honestly feel that this is important information, and it's actually important information because, as the minister said, in reality it's not as scary as it sounds, and I think it's important to do that. You know, I mean, as an opposition, I want to make it sound scary because, you know, I want the minister to change her mind and put in a rent cap. But the reality is that it is very doable. And, you know, I've not noted them down. They can go to any SNB centers and they'll help you fill out the form. I was told it's a one-page form, so it's not something all that, you know, crazy to, it's not a, no, sorry, I was going to say something I better not say. There's the iRent website, which is www.snb.ca/iRent. Je sais pas c'est quoi en français, but j'imagine qu'il y a la même chose en français. You can email the RTT, which you can find on the website. There's a 1-800 number you can find on the website. And what's also important, and I'm glad the minister brought it up, is that you can be assisted by a friend or some family members, so you don't have to go at it alone. And the minister's absolutely right. Certainly my office is very well equipped to deal with that. I was actually speaking to my constituency office assistant yesterday, and he's like, yeah, Benoit, I've been dealing with this for years. I said, you're probably going to get a whole lot more with what's coming. He says, bring it on. So, you know, so that's reassuring, at least for me, for my part of the world. You know, we have an office that we're ready for it. I'm hoping that that's the case for the 48 other offices. I'm sure the minister is ready for it in her Fredericton North constituency office. But it just goes to show that the more public information that can be put is better. And I do want to stress that. And I guess it brings me, and this to me is a consolation prize. And I'll be honest, and because that, for me, the jackpot, well, jackpot, it's not a jackpot. The better option would have been a rent cap. I do have another suggestion to the minister, and we've had this conversation. We've actually had a very public discussion through media and with media on this as well, and I do want to bring this forward. I think it's important. And it has to do with that balance that the minister referred to, which is important. It is important. I've always I've always been in politics. For me, I consider myself a centrist, and it's always been about trying to strike that balance, you know, with everything we do, including life. That's what I try to do. I succeed miserably when you look at certain aspects of my life, but let me button this up. Let me button this up too, you know. But other things, you know, maybe I succeed, maybe not. Someday, I might be judged on that someday. But in the meantime, that's what I'm trying to do. And in my mind, and I know this, you know, for one is balance means something, and the person next to me, balance means some other thing. But in my mind, and I think not just in my mind, but in the minds of many New Brunswickers, this power struggle, let's call it, just for an example, for this example, between owners and tenants favors the owners. And I'm trying to think of a way that the tenants can be better protected. And one of the ways I'm seeing it, short of a rent cap, so I've made my point with the rent cap. I'll still harp the minister about the rent cap, and she knows it, and it's all fair in love and war and in politics. But in this particular case, short of that, I am suggesting, and the minister has shown some openness, actually she has actually said it publicly, that instead of having the onus put on the owners to complain about an increase that they're getting, it's to, a tenant, sorry, to have a tenant complain about an increase that they're getting, it is having the onus put on the owners for them to justify an increase. So we would be talking here about a very similar exercise where the owners, instead of having the tenants go and say, I've just received a notice that my rent is going to increase from da-da-da-da-da-da, I don't think it's right, I want to make a complaint. Then what I am asking for, and I am going to bring an amendment, I do have an amendment prepared, is that the onus would be on the owner, and instead it would be the owner that would go to the residency's tenancies tribunal and would ask and say, I want to make an increase. This is why, because, you know, neighboring, increased cost, blah, 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 whatnot. And then the tribunal would go ahead and say, yes, it's a reasonable increase, you can go ahead, or no, it's not, or it could be the same thing as, yes, it's okay, but you have to spread it out over a certain amount of years. For example, the 3-year that this Bill 25 is bringing forward, which could be a very interesting way of putting it. So that basically, it's not all that different from Bill 25, it's just switching it up. So instead of having the tenants making their request or complaining, we would have the owners requesting. And the owners have a much more vested interest. Tenants, it's just part of their, you know, a normal tenant, they have way more other things to do in their lives. And it's not to say owners don't either, but owners have a much more vested interest. So they are more interested in knowing the ins and outs of the RTT. So that is why I want to bring forth this amendment, an amendment that would put the onus on the owners. It's like a tongue twister there. Onus on owners. So why don't I bring that amendment now? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will read it. So, I would like to amend the bill, the said bill, as follows. Section 1, subsection 1, paragraph A, by adding the following subsection, D, In the event that the landlord wishes to increase the rent in an amount that exceeds the annual consumer price index, an application for the rent increase must be made to a residential tenancies officer who shall determine whether the increase is reasonable and justified. That is my amendment. I have it in 3 copies, and I would like to submit it. So I leave it at that, and certainly am willing to answer any questions or anything like that, or proceed to the vote, or see where we want to go with that. And if the minister wants to take time to study it, absolutely.
Thank you very much, member. It's been moved by the member
I
from...
think we should look at it before you decide if it fits in the thing. We call a brief recess.
Yeah, I was going to... Yeah. We'll just take a brief recess and take a look at it. Thanks.
So, you get me,
call the committee back to order. It has been moved by the member from Kent South that section 1, subsection 1, paragraph A, subparagraph B, by adding the following subsection D, in the event that the landlord wishes to increase the rent in the amount that exceeds the annual consumer price index, an application for the rent increase must be made to a residential tenancy officer who shall determine whether the increase is reasonable and justified. Are there any questions and comments to the amendment? Okay. To the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You and I have had some discussions about this, and it is something that I've said is under consideration for introducing in the spring session. But I'd like to ask you a question and maybe get your thoughts around this. But with this proposed amendment, if a landlord wants to increase the rent above the consumer price index, they would have to come to us for approval. But I challenge you that that maybe won't fix the balance of power that you're talking about. Because if a landlord doesn't follow this, we wouldn't know unless the tenant came to us anyway. So the tenant would have to still tell us if a landlord was giving them a rent increase above a certain percentage. So if we say there's some landlords that aren't great landlords. The other thing is, too, that the landlord could come to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, get approval for a 4% rent increase for argument's sake. And then they go back and give the tenant a 5% rent increase. We wouldn't know about that either unless the tenant came to us and told us. So how would you see that this would fix that balance of power you've been talking about when we're still having to put faith that the landlords are doing what they should be? And I've said it in the past, I truly believe most landlords are good, fair, decent, honest business people. I truly do, and there is a small proportion that may not be. And I think I've shared with you, I don't know if I shared it in the press, but if we're going to put something in place, I want to deal with the ones that are not doing things in a proper way. Because in the end, we need landlords. We want as many rental units as we can possibly have out there. And we want to do everything we can to encourage development. So if you could answer my question around that, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much to the Minister through the chair for that question, actually. That's kind of weird, isn't it? It's an inverted situation. But you know what? I do have an answer. I do have an answer for that. I find the main issue here, well, it's a complicated, complex issue. We both agree on that. It's not, but let me give you a couple of examples which I believe will address some of that. Number one, the minister gave a couple of examples. What if they don't follow the law? Okay? All right. Well, here's the thing. Currently, under Bill 25, let's look at Bill 25 as it stands. If there is a 32-unit apartment building and there is an increase which is above, a certain amount, and one tenant complains and is given, how do you say it? It's denied because it's an improper increase. Well, that only applies to that tenant. It doesn't apply to the 31 others, as it was explained to me in the technical briefing. All of the 31 others need to go complain as well in order for them to benefit. Yes, there will be word of mouth, and probably eventually some people will do it. Well, if the deadline holds, or if it happens too late, then the deadline is passed, then they're going to miss out. So to answer your question, the landlord, if let's say he doesn't do, or he or she, or what are you saying? And there's no it yet, there's whatever. He, she, would go and the person would go and increase more than what they're supposed to, and you wouldn't know. Fair enough. But a tenant can complain. They go to the RTT, they complain, the RTT finds out about it, and then they would go, slap them on the wrist, hopefully, even better, stick them with a penalty, okay? And that would apply to all of the other units, all of the 32, as an example, a 32 units, 16, 12, whatever. You know what I mean? So that answers the question in the sense that how is it helpful? It is helpful in that sense. It is helpful in the sense that the onus is on the owner. And if the owner gets caught, and he will, maybe not all of them, but you only need one tenant to complain, and if he's found out, because the RTT is full of competent people, then they will, you know, the onus is on them following the law, and if they don't follow the law, then they should get a penalty. They should get a fine. They should get, you know, something. So I'm just thinking, what are the two? And if the increase is more than what they say 4% and they do 5, well, it's the same situation applies. You only need one of the tenants that complains, and then it applies to the rest of the building. So that gives much more, that balance of power that I like to talk about. Yes, it is more balanced, and then there's more onus on the landlord. That's the answer I have for the minister. Thank you.
Through the chair, it's more complicated than that, though. And it's more complicated than that because that would suppose that all 32 units, the people moved into the building at the same time and get the same rent increase across the board for every unit in that building. And that's just not the way the rental market works. So I'd be interested to see what you have to say about that, because oftentimes the rent increase would just be for one unit, not for all of the units. So how would you speak to that?
Well, that's a very good question, and the minister is right. That 32 is, how can I say, it's an exaggeration in the sense that we all know that not all 32 units are alike in terms of the rental situation. But I would argue, and this I'm just basing myself on correlations and probabilities, but a majority of those 32 would be at very similar, if not identical, rent situations. So I would say saying that 20 to 25 of these units probably is a reasonable assumption. Again, we're just going on assumptions here. But if we can cover 2/3 or 3/4 of it with one thing, that is big in itself. And if the issue here is that there is a deterrent for the owner to not do it. If he doesn't get caught, or he or she doesn't get caught, the owner, well, okay, it slips out and it, whatever. We've all driven over the speed limit and we haven't always been caught, you know, so it can happen. But when they do, there will be some form of penalty. And now that we are I think we are doing an awareness campaign about the Residencies Tenancies Tribunal, all of us together. Well, by doing that, and it's, you're right, it's oversimplifying to say it's a 32 unit and all 32 will be impacted. But there will be some unique cases. But if again, the owner is charging more than he should, based on the amendment I brought, and he gets caught, well, there will be a penalty. Right now, there are no penalties. There's just, oh, no, you can't. Oh, okay, and I'm going to change it, and then there's, you know, no harm, no foul, right? So this is where I'm going with this. So it's not about the exceptions. Really, in my mind, don't really matter that much, because if they feel, if people know, if tenants know that the owner has gone above the CPI, well, they can complain, and then they can call out the owner, and the RTT can bring the owner back to order. Thank you. That's the answer I have.
Through the chair to the member opposite, this is a little different where I'm asking you questions, but there's a reason for that, actually, because we are considering something around this, an application-based process. That is one of the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act that we are considering for next year. And so I'm asking your feedback on that so that can be taken into the consideration. I am going to ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment because, as we both acknowledged, this is so incredibly complicated. And if we were to put something like this amendment in place, there would be a number of criteria that would have to be developed around it so that we could be clear and concise on what would be required of the landlord and what they would be required to provide us to be able to make a determination of whether they could do the rent increase or not. And that would take time to develop what that criteria is, and we cannot implement something into an act until we have a full understanding of what would be required around that change. That being said, so I'm asking my colleagues to vote no currently, but I will commit to you, my critic on the opposite side of the House, that we will take this amendment and consider it as part of other changes we'll be bringing forward in the spring around the Residential Tenancies Act.
Yes, thank you. I do have just, I would just like to react to the minister's answer. Now that we're back to the normal way of working. But I guess, and I appreciate the minister's answer. I mean, that's not where I would want it to go. I guess my only reaction would be to say that there are, you know, this is a bill, and as we know, there are regulations that come after with the bill. So would it be possible to accept the amendment as is, and then the department could go and make the regulations after the fact that would consider all of what the minister just talked about? Listen, I'm preaching, you know, I'm defending my amendment, so I'm just, you know, trying some other way here. So would that be possible?
Through the chair to the member opposite, that also will not work. An amendment like this would have to be looked at within the context of the existing Act, and there would be likely need to be other changes within the Act required to make this work. So we would have to do an analysis of all the other sections based on this proposed amendment before we could approve it. So I will again ask my colleagues to vote no, but I will again say that this is certainly something that is under serious consideration for the new year.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Seeing none, is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the amendment? All those in favor, please say yea. Yea. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. I say the nays have it, and the amendment defeated. Is there any more questions? Okay. Recognize the member from Kent South.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, comme on dit en français, un gars s'essaye. So I tried. I do have just a couple of other questions and remarks. I'm pretty much ending my time here. We do have a limited debate time, unfortunately, Madam Chair. Now, the only issue with the fact that this amendment was defeated And I do appreciate that the minister is looking into it, and hopefully something similar, if not very close to what I suggested, will be in an upcoming bill amendment. My only concern right now is the gap between now and then. There will be a 3-4 month period where, because we know now, yesterday we've been made aware that the House will be reconvening on March 21st for budget. So technically, unless something dramatic happens, there won't be any new bills presented until the spring, which leaves a whole season right now, which happens to be a season called winter, which is a pretty harsh season here in New Brunswick, where, you know, how can I say, where the vulnerable population is even more vulnerable. So, and I understand that the RTT is in place and the bill will help somewhat, but again, to address what I consider, you know, not going far enough, I am asking the minister, is there something more that can be done until from now, and I'm not talking about Bill 25, I'm talking beyond Bill 25, is there something that can be done from now until the next bill comes in the spring to help out the people that need the help? And I'm referring to the vulnerable population, the ones that need this type of protection from you know, very high rent increases and need an extra push. Thank you.
Through the chair to the member opposite, the changes that we've already introduced to the Residential Tenancies Act require the landlord to give 6 months notice for a rent increase. We know that we've heard from 112 tenants that will be getting rent increases July 1st onward. But the good news is, with the changes that the amendments we're introducing here, is if there was tenants that did not come to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to ask to have their rent increases reviewed, they will have an additional 60 days in the beginning of the new year to bring those to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal for our review and mediation. Any rent increases that are received by tenants from now onward still would not happen for 6 months. We would have the opportunity to have the information on how many tenants are getting rent increases that they deem as unreasonable. And we'll have that information long before their rent increase actually comes into play. I think this government has also demonstrated that when we see that bold action is required, we will do that very quickly, and we can do that retroactively as well. And we can certainly let the landlords know what is coming in the spring session so that they are prepared. So, through the chair to the member opposite, we have a time frame in there. Even though you're concerned about those 3 months, we have time to make changes if they are necessary.
Thank you, through the chair to the minister, for that answer. Okay, I guess the only thing I would like to add to that is it's important to be reactive, and it is. It's important to be reactive, and a government must be reactive. However, I would argue it is even more important for a government to be proactive. And that is usually better if the government can do that. I understand it's not always possible, but I do want to just say that, state that, and leave it there for the minister to take note. That pretty much sums it up, Madam Chair. This has been a good discussion. We have a better understanding of Bill 25. We have a better understanding of what can be done. There's just one observation that I'd like to make, and obviously the Minister is more than welcome to react on that, is that I think this government and this department, Service New Brunswick, this Minister, must prepare that very soon, starting in January, now that the rent cap seems to it's highly likely is off the table for 2023, there will be a sharp increase in requests for reviews. I'll be blunt. I will be encouraging people to make requests for reviews for any type of increase that goes above the CPI, which I've never done before. I've never done before. It was well, to be honest, it was never much of a need, because it was either incremental increases or there was a rent cap in place. And now you have neither of those things. The only thing that's there to protect the tenants is the RTT. So I can assure the Minister that I personally will make sure that a lot of people in my riding will be using the RTT. And just by looking at what, the 112, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm shooting from the hip here. This is not but I wouldn't be surprised there could be as much as 100 requests just from my riding over the next 2 or 3 months. So I am saying this not to scare anybody, but I am saying this so the RTT and this Minister is ready for what is probably about to come. And I am but one of 49. And there's a lot of people in New Brunswick where this is going to have an impact. So I am saying this because I think there's going to be a big impact on the RTT. The RTT is going to be very, very busy. I'm very much hoping that they will be able to maintain those delays that they currently have. If 47 days is the maximum, which it's actually not bad, I'm just hoping that they will, in the technical briefing, and I'm saying this openly, they were actually saying that they're looking for a couple of extra resources. They actually said, please send us your if you have CVs to send, we'll be happy to have them. So I'm saying this as a public service announcement, supporting the Minister and Service New Brunswick, which I had the privilege of being the Minister for as well for a few months, that, they are looking for staff. And trust me when I say this is a personal opinion, they will need it. They will need that extra staff, because there's going to be a whole lot more requests for review coming forward in the coming months. So I do say this as a mise en garde to the Minister and the Department and Service New Brunswick, not because I want to scare, it's just because I think that's going to be the new normal, the new reality coming forward, until hopefully there will be new legislation that will put it more on the owner side. So that's what I have. I want to thank the staff, because I know the staff is very competent. I appreciate them a lot. And the Minister has been very forthcoming as well. I appreciate the Minister's straight answers. She's always been like that, and it's much appreciated. And I appreciated the debate. It was a healthy debate, and I hope she agrees. I certainly thought it was. And we'll be watching, because it's an important file. This is a file that New Brunswick care about the most. It's a hot-button issue. I'm not saying anything anybody here doesn't know. And I, as my role of critic, the Minister can be assured that I will be watching, and we'll be trying our best to make sure that New Brunswickers have a place to stay, a good place, decent conditions, at a decent price. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you again for everybody at Service New Brunswick.
Can I respond to him? Thank you, Madam Chair. You started out by talking about whether to be proactive or reactive and which is better, and I 100% agree with you. I much prefer being proactive than reactive. And that's why I'm so pleased that our government recognized the housing crisis and has put a ministry in place to deal with housing. There is a significant amount of work that has happened in the last few weeks since the ministry was created. And there's a lot of work that will be done over the next few months to put together a housing strategy for New Brunswick that is more proactive, that will have a strategy behind it with outcomes that we can measure to ensure that we are making the changes we need to get ourselves out of our housing crisis. So the goal is to become more proactive and less reactive. It just takes a period of time to get from point A to point B. And so I will again say that I'm glad our government recognizes this so we can be more proactive on this housing file going forward. And I too appreciate the healthy debate back and forth and having the opportunity to ask you some questions about some of the changes you would like to see so that we can take that information into account when we're not sitting here in the House and you know, getting the work done to get some of the changes made, more amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act. So I just wanted to say thank you for the, you know, the good discussion back and forth, and I continue to want to collaborate with you going forward as we set our overall strategy for housing for New Brunswick. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Minister, recognize the member from Kent North.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bienvenue à la ministre, bienvenue à l'équipe qui l'entoure. Oui, le ministre de la Santé, l'ancien ministre de la Santé depuis aujourd'hui, que je suis reconnu, mais j'attends encore la paye qui m'est due pour mes années de service. Mais blague à part, Madame la Présidente, merci beaucoup à tout le monde d'être ici. Je fais référence, je pense que la ministre semble confuse, je fais référence à la période de questions où votre ministre de la Santé m'a appelé l'ancien ministre de la Santé. Fait que c'était une blague, c'était pas... ouais, c'est ça. Ouais, juste pour clarifier la chose. Merci d'être ici. Ma première question est assez simple. J'aimerais que la ministre nous étale vraiment la justification pour ne pas mettre en place un plafond des loyers. Il est question de plafond des loyers, il est question de ne pas avoir un plafond des loyers. Donc, je veux essayer de comprendre une fois pour tout, parce qu'il y a eu des informations à gauche et à droite. J'aimerais comprendre pourquoi ne pas mettre en place un plafonnement de loyer.
Thank you. I got him. Okay. Through the chair to the member opposite, I have maybe, anyway, I think I've been pretty clear about why we didn't extend the rent cap, because it was a temporary measure that we introduced last year. Our goal is to have a balanced approach to housing here in New Brunswick, and that balance is not only protecting tenants, but also respecting the important role that landlords and developers have in the housing spectrum. And the goal is to have a balance between the two. And as we've read in the press, a rent cap can be a blunt instrument. And so I'm going to just go through some of the changes that we have made to enhance the protections that tenants currently have in New Brunswick. We've made, with this proposed amendment, 3 amendments in the last year to the Residential Tenancies Act to enhance protections for tenants. In December of last year, we introduced changes to legislation that limit rent increases to once every year and prohibit rent increases within the first year of a tenancy. We increased the authority of the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to allow it to review all rent increases, not only those on long-term tenancies. And when they review these rent increases, they do it to ensure the new rent amount that the landlord is proposing is comparable to market value for similar units in the geographic area, which means the review is for a specific unit, in a specific condition, in a building, considering its condition and considering other rental units within the geographic area. And all that is taken into consideration when the Residential Tenancies Tribunal reviews a proposed rent increase. At that time, we also increased the notice period for a rent increase to 6 months from the 3 that it had been originally. And this is to give tenants more time to adapt if a rent increase is proven justified. And at this time, we introduced the giving tenants 30 days to apply for a rent increase review instead of the 15 days it was at that time. Now, granted, this new proposal then would extend that, double that again to 60 days to give them even more time to come back to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal and ask for some assistance. And then we also took care of some administrative steps to try to remove barriers for landlords and tenants when they are applying for a review. In January of this year, we introduced more changes. One that everybody's been talking about for the last, since I've got put in place, is the rent cap. So we implemented a temporary rent cap from January 1st of this year to December 31st of this year. And that was at 3.8%, which was 2021's CPI, Consumer Price Index, in case people don't know what that acronym is. At that time, so in January last year, we also limited landlords' right to terminate tenancies for one of 4 acceptable reasons. These reasons are: a family member is going to be moving into the unit in the building, the landlord is going to perform extensive renovations that require the unit to be vacant, the space is going to be converted into a non-residential premise, and the final reason is that if a person that's living in the unit is employed by the building owner as a superintendent, and that employment has ended, then that landlord can evict the tenant. We also included changes that let tenants apply for compensation if their tenancy was terminated unlawfully. And we also introduced fines if a landlord terminates a tenancy in bad faith. And then what we are currently debating is 2 additional changes. The first being the 60 days, which I mentioned previously, and the second, that if the Residential Tenancies Tribunal officer does deem the rent increase justifiable, it gives the authority for the Residential Tenancies Tribunal to require that that rent increase occur over more than 1 year, so up to 3 years. So it could be distributed out over 3 years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci beaucoup à la ministre pour la réponse. Quand on parle d'équilibre, c'est une définition qui peut être assez large. Et donc, est-ce que c'est réellement un processus équilibré? Moi, voir l'état dans lequel se trouvent certains de mes citoyens face à des augmentations ou à des stratagèmes qui sont utilisés par des acheteurs, je trouve pas encore que c'est équilibré. Lorsqu'on parle d'avoir enlevé le plafond de loyer, le plafonnement de loyer, les économistes, dont M. Saillant, dit encore que ça a un rôle important à jouer. C'est pas à lui seul la seule chose qui doit être mise en place, mais ça a un rôle important à jouer. Et en fait, M. Saillant argumente que dans une approche équilibrée, il y aurait un plafonnement des loyers. Ce que la ministre refuse de remettre en place. Donc, vous m'avez justifié ou vous m'avez élaboré ce qui a été fait, mais vous ne justifiez pas pourquoi il n'y a pas de plafonnement de loyer. Ben, en fait, ça n'a pas affecté les constructions. Ça n'a... et c'est ça, ça n'a pas affecté le nombre de constructions. On a vu cette semaine dans un article, c'est assez clair que c'est en augmentation. Et au niveau des économistes, ils disent que c'est encore nécessaire dans une approche équilibrée. Ce qui n'est pas pris en compte dans la décision ou n'importe quelle décision du tribunal, c'est la capacité de payer des locataires. Donc, ce qui peut sembler justifiable et équilibré pour certains peut sembler non justifiable et déséquilibré pour d'autres. En fait, je dirais même que le tribunal ne remplit pas toujours son rôle. Puis je vais vous expliquer pourquoi. Dans ma circonscription, il y a un cas en particulier où il y a raison de croire qu'un acheteur, une grande corporation ontarienne, qui a énormément de ressources, hein, qui comprend comment trouver chaque petit loophole, comme ils disent en anglais, à leur avantage, tandis que les citoyens, les locataires, n'ont pas ces ressources-là. Hein, c'est des gens qui ont des ressources limitées, n'ont même pas de l'argent pour aller voir un avocat pour les défendre. Et j'ai parlé de ça en deuxième lecture, où ces locataires-là se sont fait flouer. Le propriétaire actuel, ou l'ancien propriétaire d'il n'y a pas longtemps, de très bonne foi. Je ne pense pas que c'est la personne à blâmer dans cette histoire du tout. C'est un bloc appartement qui a appartenu pendant longtemps. Il s'est fait dire par l'acheteur que pour des raisons juste techniques, il fallait faire signer un nouveau bail avec des nouvelles conditions à ses locataires. C'était juste pour que l'achat passe, puis tout ça. Et on sait que l'agent immobilier a participé aussi à flouer ce message-là. Donc, l'ancien propriétaire, une personne extrêmement respectée par ses locataires, a été voir, eux autres savent, c'est une personne qui est vieillissante, il est à la retraite, ça devenait un fardeau de s'occuper d'un bloc appartement, c'était difficile. Donc, par respect de cette personne-là, tous les locataires ont signé le nouveau bail. Puis lorsque les locataires ont fait une plainte au tribunal, le tribunal s'en est lavé les mains. On dit, il n'y a rien qu'on peut faire, il y a un contrat qui a été signé. Le contrat a été signé. Donc, la raison que je parle de cette histoire ici...
Member, can I get you to hang on just 1 second? There's just no translation.
Oh.
Good? Yep. Okay, go ahead.
OK, merci. Donc, la raison que je parle de cette histoire ici, je suppose que j'ai été rendu quand ça a coupé, là, en espérant que vous n'avez pas trop manqué. Mais ce que je suis en train de dire, finalement, c'est que le tribunal s'en est lavé les mains et a dit, il n'y a rien qu'on peut faire, il y a un contrat de signé maintenant. Mais quand on regarde l'histoire, tu le sais. Tu le sais que ces locataires-là se sont fait flouer. Ils ont tombé entre des cracks. Là, sont imposés une augmentation de salaire de 100 %. Et ces locataires-là n'ont plus de recours. Et donc, il y a certains des locataires qui ont dû sortir du bloc appartement, puis il y en a d'autres qui ne savent pas encore ce qu'ils vont faire. Un plafonnement de loyer, par contre, protégerait l'ensemble des gens. Ça fonctionne ailleurs. Et donc, la question d'être équilibré, je pense que c'est une question qui est quand même ouverte à débat. Et la raison que je voulais amener cette histoire-là, c'est justement pour faire le point que le tribunal ne remplit pas toujours son rôle. Donc, en sachant que la construction n'a pas été affectée par un plafonnement de loyer, en sachant que les économistes disent que ça fait partie d'une solution équilibrée, je demande, je sais déjà la réponse, mais j'espère qu'elle va changer, c'est pour ça que je le demande de nouveau. Les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick, les citoyens du Nouveau-Brunswick ont besoin d'un plafonnement de loyer. Ça fait partie, c'est à la base d'une stratégie équilibrée. Est-ce que la ministre, en sachant que les informations qu'elle a utilisées pour prendre sa décision n'étaient pas les bonnes, est-ce qu'elle peut nous assurer aujourd'hui qu'un plafonnement des loyers s'en vient rapidement?
Through the chair to the member opposite, there was a lot in that, a lot of different topics that you brought up in what eventually became your question. I think, and this is something that I debated with the member from the official opposition, part of this is a philosophical difference that we have on how to approach the problem that we have at hand. And it's imperative that we balance both the tenants' needs and the landlord's and development needs. And while I quoted one number, which is an indicator of future building, which would be building permits, which in fact are down this year, there are, and I think you can agree, the housing market and the housing spectrum is extremely complicated, as just as evidenced by 3 improvements to the Residential Tenancies Act to better protect tenants. And the role that I've been asked to play requires trying to balance both of those needs. You talk about a landlord, I presume, in your riding, and you talked about them from being outside of New Brunswick, a very large landlord that arguably is probably quite sophisticated. And, you know, you did talk about other jurisdictions have rent caps. This is accurate. It's about 50-50 in the provinces in Canada. But a number of them, even that they do have rent caps, have an above cap application system. So it's a cap, but it's not really a cap. And then you're talking about these large landlords that are sophisticated. They can figure out how to, you know, provide the information required to support their request to go above the rent cap. You also talked about a story around how one economist in New Brunswick feels on the rent cap issue, but I argue you could find just as many economists, more, that do not believe that rent caps work. And I've got lots of those articles as well. So it's just a demonstration of how complex this issue is, and then you can find data to support both sides, rent cap, no rent cap. So I'll say again that we are being nimble and making changes that are necessary to ensure a balance between landlords and tenants. And probably you and I will be philosophically on a little bit of a different side of what we think is the right answer. But I will say, I'm listening. So, you know, we had a great debate back and forth with my critic from the official opposition. He and I are slightly different philosophically, but I think I demonstrated there as well that I am listening and taking all the information that's provided to try to make that balanced approach between the tenants and landlords, and I will continue to do that.
Merci. Mais la construction n'a pas été affectée. Il y a plus d'unités qui sont en construction en ce moment qu'il y avait l'an passé. Par contre, il y a des citoyens et des citoyennes du Nouveau-Brunswick qui ne peuvent pas trouver de logement ou qui tombent dans les cracks du tribunal, comme que j'ai essayé de vous le démontrer avec mon histoire. Je sais qu'elle était longue, mais c'est quelque chose qui est arrivé dans ma circonscription et c'est un problème qui est arrivé à des citoyens de ma circonscription et qui ont tombé dans les cracks des solutions que vous avez mises en place. Et à ma connaissance, vous êtes la ministre responsable du logement et donc vous êtes accountable pour les actions de votre ministère. Et donc, c'est pour ça que j'ai partagé cette histoire-là, parce que c'est pas aussi facile de dire que le tribunal est là. Appelez le tribunal, appelez le tribunal. Le tribunal n'est pas toujours là. C'est ça le point que je voulais faire. Je comprends que le spectrum que vous utilisez, le nouveau mot qui est utilisé beaucoup, est large, mais il y a une crise. Et la crise, elle n'est pas équilibrée. La crise n'est pas dans la construction de logements. La crise n'est pas que ces grandes entreprises-là n'ont pas d'argent pour investir. La crise est chez les citoyens et les citoyennes qui ne peuvent pas se trouver de logement ou qui voient des augmentations qui dépassent leur capacité de payer. Et donc, il n'y a pas d'équilibre. C'est penché. Et pour cette raison-là, un plafonnement des loyers rééquilibrait la chose. Surtout dans la situation actuelle. Un investissement massif en logement abordable et social serait aussi important. Fait que ça, c'était pour répondre à la ministre. Je ne sais pas quoi demander d'autre comme question parce qu'on reçoit toujours les mêmes réponses. Et ces réponses-là, moi, je vais sur le terrain, puis je suis obligé de dire à mes citoyens qu'il n'y a rien qui va vous aider. Le gouvernement fait des petits changements administratifs qui essayent de démontrer qu'ils font quelque chose, mais que pratiquement, il n'y a pas d'aide pour vous autres. Puis je suis vraiment tanné de dire ça à mes citoyens. Je suis extrêmement tanné de dire ça à mes citoyens. Parce que quand on regarde les données, le sans-abri, ça augmente. Des gens qui ne peuvent plus payer leurs billes, ça, c'est en augmentation. Donc, Madame la Présidente, je vais m'arrêter là. On sait que ce projet de loi ici est malheureusement dans une autre motion qui nous limite dans le temps. J'ai entendu beaucoup des réponses qu'elle a données à mon collègue. Je connais la position du gouvernement sur cette question ici. Ma seule question vraiment pour la ministre aujourd'hui, c'était avec les révélations, avec l'information qu'on sait aujourd'hui, que selon moi, démontre le besoin d'un plafonnement des loyers. Est-ce que la ministre allait reconsidérer ça? La réponse est claire, c'est non. Et donc, Madame la Présidente, j'ai malheureusement plus de questions et beaucoup d'inquiétudes pour les citoyens et les citoyennes de ma circonscription, mais de d'autres circonscriptions aussi, qui ne trouveront pas leur compte dans ce projet de loi ici.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Part of the work that we are undertaking on the housing side of things is to look at what programs are currently in place to assist individuals when they have housing needs anywhere along the spectrum. And in doing that, we are looking at what the gaps are within the programs that are currently offered by the government so that people aren't falling through the cracks, as you reference, so that we can have appropriate programs in place that address the entire spectrum and the needs. And that's being undertaken right now. And we'll be developing a strategy around that and making changes to programs to help the individuals that need it most. And you also made a comment about the need for massive investment in social housing, and I would like to say I believe $100 million being invested into social housing is a pretty big investment in social housing. In fact, we're building the first social housing units that have been built in 38 years. And I would also like to say that we do need stories like the ones you've told, but we need those individuals to go to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, and they may have. And if there is a gap there that needs to be addressed, we can address it when we know about it. And as I've indicated when asked, that we are considering additional improvements to the Residential Tenancies Act so we can lessen any gaps that may be there. So I guess I'll just leave it at the work is being undertaken. There will be more to come on changes to the Residential Tenancies Act. The two changes we're proposing here, I believe, are very good changes. And I'm sure you and I will be debating back and forth because we have a different philosophy on how to address issues, but I welcome it in the future.
Any further questions? Member from Bathurst West Beresford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What a great segue to where I was going to go, to talk about my frustration on this file. The minister has introduced a new term since she became minister, spectrum. I don't know if one of your staff came up with that word. It's a great word, by the way, but I don't know who came up with the word spectrum. But housing spectrum refers to large, complex issues and problems. And this is the second bill that's brought up, and the minister probably already knows where I'm going because I brought it up last time. If you're going to talk about a housing spectrum, then there has to be a holistic approach to the file. And that is the frustration that's going on. What we're getting is dribs and drabs of this policy, that policy. We're trying to find out what the whole strategy is. When we talk about a whole strategy, we're not pleased, and the minister answers, well, we did this and we did that. We don't have the full picture. So she's right. Maybe this is great legislation. Maybe it's a good tactic or whatever it is. Maybe it's not far enough. Maybe it's plenty far, but since we don't have the full picture and we're not going to get it to the spring, we're still coming back with parts of a picture, parts of a puzzle that is very frustrating for us to be able to evaluate if it's going to do good or not, or if it's going to do what's desired, because at the end, that's what we want. So I'll ask, and I have a very quick question because I asked it last time, and I really hope I'm not going to ask it again, because the next time I would like to see it in a plan, not another bill that is waiting for a plan. One of the problems that I believe is going on with the tribunal, and I know it's now two ministers that keeps bringing it up, get them to call, and I see the numbers that came out, and it was quite shocking. Like, for the number of calls that I get in my office and to see what's been put in as complaints, there's a disconnect somewhere, and I still feel, and I hear it from some tenants, they are afraid to call. They feel unempowered with their landlords, and they just don't see the balance of power. And I've asked this last time, and I don't know if the minister can answer this time. As part of your strategy, can there be a whistleblower clause or whistleblower legislation? One of the issues I have right now is somebody to go to the tribunal has to put their name in, file a complaint. Like, there's people that just want us to say, this is a bad landlord, or I have a situation, can somebody check in on it? And there's no way for us to open those files. So can we tighten up on that and just get the cases out there? Maybe sometimes there's nothing to be done, but at least it can get checked. And I think maybe that would get some of the numbers up, or at least it would give us a vehicle to flag some potential situations. One very major one that I had last year in my riding, and I just couldn't get people to call for fear that they were going to have some repercussions from the new landlord. We need to have some vehicle to flag those situations and have the tribunal go and they do good work. They go into the buildings and they go talk to the landlords and to the tenants. I have no qualms about what they do, but it's to get them there. We have to find a way.
through the chair to the member opposite, I like a plan too. I like a plan. We need, you know, strategy is important, and then you put your tactics against the strategy to get the outcomes that you need. So I'm just asking for a little patience from the member opposite. We're doing a big lift right now, looking at the spectrum, and it is a really good word, I agree, and I don't even know where it came from. I don't know who started talking about the spectrum, but I liked it and started using it right away. Part of doing a good strategy, though, is really to understand the current state of affairs. And so we are currently analyzing all this, as I said to the other member that was questioning me, the member from Kent North, that we're working on the gap analysis right now of what programs are in place and looking to see where we do have gaps that we could close. And part of the exercise in doing this is inviting stakeholders to be part of that discussion and be part of the problem-solving exercise. So expect a housing summit early next year to begin talking about exactly where we are currently and what the future needs to look like so that we can have a good strategy and a pathway forward. And I do hear your concern, and I've heard it from a number of members, that they're concerned about tenants being frightened to go to the RTT for assistance. So I acknowledge that that is possible. I will say that we currently, in the current legislation, do have some protections in there for tenants that do come to the RTT. If they come and ask for assistance from the RTT, there's a provision in there that a landlord cannot evict them within a year of them going to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. Now the question is, does that go far enough? And what I will say to you is, well, we will consider a whistleblower provision, adding that to the Act. And that will be part of our review of options early in the new year. And we potentially could bring that forward as a change as well in the spring. So I take your idea. We will give it careful consideration, and I'll let you know if we can figure out a way to do that, because it's an interesting way, possibly, to make it less scary for tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate that it'll be taken under consideration. I think in whatever help we can provide, absolutely. On the rent cap, and I know we've gone pretty deep into it. Last year, the rent cap was brought in as a temporary fix, so that we could do a full analysis, full research, look at all the situation, the programs. So the rent cap's coming off. Is the minister still keeping that option open until all these findings come in, that if we're going to see another surge, that the rent cap could be brought back as a stopgap until we get that full strategy?
I could answer it really quickly, but I'll put a few more words around it. I've tried to be very clear when I didn't introduce legislation to extend the rent cap, that this is not to be a free-for-all for landlords to just go crazy with rents on tenants. And also been clear that if that seems to be what is happening, I absolutely will consider bringing our rent cap back in place. So I put a lot of onus on the landlords to be appropriate and consider the needs of their tenants when they're considering rent increases for the next year. And one of the good things about the previous changes that we made in legislation is that landlords are required to give 6 months' notice of any rent increase, and we will have the ability to see, have a view on what is actually happening over the next few months. And we will take that under consideration when we propose more changes in the spring. And as we showed last time, we're also willing to do it retroactively if necessary, and that is still on the table through the chair to the member opposite.
Thank you, Minister. Through the chair, I don't have another question. I just have one clarification comment that I think is important, because I wanted to get out there that the rent cap was difficult for some landlords. I want to put it out there that my concern is always not around landlords. We have a ton of good landlords that are really concerned about their residents in this province. It is those predators that I want out. And whether it's a rent cap or whatever else you guys want to find, those are the ones that we have to stop. And we just can't keep having this false argument between good landlords and tenants that need protection. The majority is a very good ecosystem, and we can work with it. So I just want to clarify, not anti-landlord at all. There's a lot of good ones out there. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Well, and I'm going to echo that too, because I truly believe most of the landlords in this province are very, very good landlords and care about their tenants and their relationship with their tenants. And we need to address the ones, the very few that aren't. And we'll be continuing to look for ways to get at those and not the majority of great landlords in New Brunswick.
Okay, any final comments or any more questions? Seeing none, do you have any final words, Minister?
Maybe just quickly saying that debate like this is incredibly important. It's very good to have an understanding of other perspectives on this complicated file, because I think we've all acknowledged that it's very, very complicated. It's a spectrum, and you're right. And you know what? I'm just going to say that I would like to continue this debate going forward. There are a number of different ways to make improvements to get New Brunswick out of its housing crisis, and I am listening and considering all the information I'm provided, and my team is doing the same thing. So it was great debate today, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Minister, and we'll ask your staff to step out and we can have a vote. Is it the pleasure of the committee that Bill number 25, an act respecting residential tenancies, stand as presented and the bill be reported as agreed to? All in favor of the motion, please say yea. Yea. All opposed, please say nay. Motion carried. And that's all for today. So I call the committee adjourned. Thank you.